Good evening. Happy Sunday, everybody. And you may notice that I'm not in my ordinary office right now. I am being held against my will by a psychopath. No, that's not actually the case. I am down visiting friend of the show, Mark Lefebvre, and he has kindly allowed me to use his rig to do my ordinary Sunday night live stream. So I know there's thousands of you watching right now, and I'm glad I was able to not disappoint. We have been having quite the adventure down here in South Carolina. It rained all day Wednesday, which was not what I was hoping for, but we survived that. And he showed me around the South Carolina State Museum, which was delightful. They had a big telescope up there, but they couldn't open up and show us things because it was raining. Um, a lot of really neat exhibits. I did not know that a state museum could actually be that interesting, so that was a lot of fun. On Thursday, we went to a state park, and I got us lost, and it was dark, and we were in the woods, and we had to call the forest the Forest Service to get us out. So that stunk. Yes, I am using Mark's setup. Don't worry, he'll be back. He'll be back. I haven't killed him and stolen his things. All the evidence they have against me is circumstantial. How you doing, Ted?
I'm doing really well, Father Eric. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Yeah, I've
You-
just been having adventures down here in South Carolina. So
Welcome to the
down in
South. Yeah.
yeah, thank you, thank you. I lived in South Carolina for 5 years actually. We were all on Shaw Air Force Base. My dad was in the Air Force. So going to Poinsett State Park was supposed to be like, oh, we used to go hiking here, and this will be so much fun. Um, and then all of a sudden, we couldn't find a map for starters. Like the little map thing was empty. Like, we'll be fine. And then Mark left his smartphone in my car, and I only have a dumb phone. Um, no flashlights, no water. My phone was running low on batteries, and we picked the craziest trail in the world. It's just going all over, like switchbacks, nothing but switchbacks. And then it was dark, and we were turned around, and we couldn't get back. So
Oh my goodness. You know, you're
yeah.
you're reminding me of this book that I read like 15 years ago called Deep Survival. It was basically all in the psychology of like why some people make it out of the woods and some people don't. And what you're telling is basically like not to freak you out, but like this is like that's like the textbook story of how people die, where they're like, oh yeah, I know the place, like it'll be fine, like I can totally handle this. And I mean, so what was interesting was it wasn't like it's not like a survival guide or anything like that. It was just like what is the thinking behind like going on in the heads of people that do make it out and don't make it out. And one of the things that I remembered, he had this term he called bending the map, which is people's ability to convince themselves, oh yeah, it's just like, oh yeah, that rock totally looks like the one we passed earlier, and like, yeah, we just go a little bit further. Like that inability to reconcile the fact that you're actually lost and like start doing the sensible lost person things is what kills people. And so one of the things always stuck with me is he said that one of the groups of people that is most likely to survive in the situations is not like tough, able men. It's like children because they know when they're lost, they know when they're cold, they know when they're wet, and they just like act like that's the case, and then they get found by rescuers. And it's the guys who refuse to come to terms with what's happened to them that don't make it out.
Yeah, yeah, no, we were both like, this trail's not going in the right direction. Oh, if we keep on walking, and then at one point I had to say, Mark, what's your threshold for us calling for help? And it's like when it's dark. And it's like, okay. And but
Yeah.
yeah, my battery is getting pretty low, and the dispatch here, the dispatch was not helpful initially. So like I call 911 dispatch, and they're like, "Well, what county are you in?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm in Poinsett State Park." And they're like, "Well, I don't know where that is." And it's like not hard to find. Like you just Google that one.
Google Maps. Google Maps it.
And then they were
Oh
trying to
my
connect
goodness.
us with the Sumter County. They had to ping our towers to figure out where we were, and then they tried to connect us with the Sumter County 911, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll like send a deputy out to get you." And it's like, are they the most qualified? Like, I won't say no, but like, are they the most qualified? Like, why don't you call the park rangers, which every state
Yeah.
park has? And then they were going to call the park rangers, but they had the wrong number because that guy hadn't been there for a year. But they eventually found the right number, and they came out on ATVs and gave us a ride home. So
Amazing.
anyway, Mark is
Amazing.
blaming me 100%, and I'll just take it because why not? Yeah.
Yeah, bear the burden for him. Bear the burden of a bruised ego.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then they asked us, okay, why don't you just take out your phone and look up a map? And it's like, bro, if I could have done that, we wouldn't be calling you.
We wouldn't be on this phone conversation. Oh my goodness, that's
Oh,
amazing.
it was wild. It was wild.
That's
But you know what?
amazing.
Like we got to the point where uh we got to the point where it was just like, yep, we can't get out of here. We're gonna have to call for help. And thankfully I had enough battery and we had cell tower access and we didn't freeze to death because it is the South, but it would have been cold enough where it'd be kind of touch and go.
Yeah, yeah. You especially if you got like cotton on and it's been raining and it's like 42 out and windy. It's like, look out, man. Like that'll get you. That'll get you right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Wow. Well, there you go. There's the South for you. It's all warm and welcoming, and then you get out in the woods and it'll bite you. Preferably not being bitten by like a timber rattler or something like that. We do have, and we have an abundance of copperheads and rattlesnakes and cottonmouths and all that sort of stuff out here. There's this famous story of in my family of my grandfather. He's got some land on a little river north of here in the Ozarks, and we'd go out there all the time in the summer. And for one of my birthdays, we went out to one of his swimming holes. You always check for snakes, and this time, sure enough, there's a cottonmouth like on the rock that we that kind of went down into the water, saw this sandstone. And you'd think, okay, you chase the snake off. Not my grandfather. No, he went after it with a stick and started beating the snake. And the snake's like, I'm getting out of here, guys. And like makes a beeline for the water. And he chases after it and throws it back up on the shore with a stick and keeps trying to beat it to death. And finally, after like 3 or 4 bouts of this, like the snake trying to get out of there, he like overcomes it. And other than probably my brother and I like were like, cool, can we cut it up and use it as fish bait? Oh my goodness. Well, Father, I've got something that I'd like to hear I'd like to hear your thoughts on if you're interested.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah. So it's this something that's been bouncing around sort of in this corner of the internet. I think
Whoa,
it.
whoa, 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 whoa. Sorry, I just
Am I not?
gotta. We have rules here.
Oh.
You don't. Shh,
Oh.
shh.
Okay. Okay. There's this
You don't
thing
talk
that there's this thing that these guys that I like to listen to on podcasts occasionally have been talking about. One of them is named Dr. Peterson. Have you heard of him before?
I've heard of this Dr. Peterson,
I
yes.
think he's like from New England or something. I don't know. Anyway, he says some cool stuff, and people will probably like get interested in him at some point.
Yeah, he
Um,
might make it big.
he might make it big at some point. so, so on that conversation that most recent conversation with Vervaeke, there's
Mhm.
this there's this whole point where they're talking about Vervaeke's talking about like goodness, like adverbial qualities and like total consciousness events and this sort of
Mm.
like being in touch with like the ground of being. Um,
If such a thing were possible for humans, go on.
There's a lot of questions about that, but
Yeah.
at one point, the part where I got where the thing that I want to bring up is at this point Peterson brought up in the account of Exodus where Moses goes to the burning bush and he says, "Hey, look, the way you're talking about sort of like fundamental being, doesn't it seem like that's what is going on at the burning bush with the tetragrammaton, the I am that I am?"
Mhm.
And they sort of like went off on that, and there was a lot of this sort of like if you've listened to it, I mean, it's very. I don't think I'm reading into this at all in Vervaeke's language. It's this very like departicularized way of talking about it. Like there's the things, and then there's the through lines, and then Vervaeke's like, I want the through lines of the through lines of the through lines, and
Mhm.
you like
Recursive relevance realization.
recursive relevance realization that leads you to out of any particularity. And then they went off on that. and so what was so here's sort of like my point of discussion, and I think Paul Vanderklay brought this up too. I did listen to part of his talk on like personality and fiction or something, and he brought this up a little bit. But what no one's talked about, what I haven't heard anyone say is that at that point God gives Moses not one name for himself but two names, right? Because he gives him the name I am that I am sent you. He says, right? He says, what he says, what shall I tell the Israelites? Like who's sending me? And he says, tell them I am sent you. And then at the end of the conversation, he says, tell them I am that I am. Tell them that the God of Israel, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent you. And my reading of that has always been a very clear articulation of both the transcendent quality of God, which is obvious, everyone sees that, as well as a profoundly personal immanence, right? He says, look,
Right.
I'll buy that like as being a way of talking about that statement about God, that he is the total ground of being, right? I think something like God is being itself, being himself. I don't even know what pronoun to use there, but that's not it, right? Because then he turns around and he says, also, I'm the God of your forefathers, specifically these three forefathers who you know the stories about them, you know how I was in their life. So I find that to me sort of is like the balance there that's like wasn't discussed at all, per earlier conversations about, what's this interaction between Christianity and Platonism. That seems to be that sort of like bent of Platonism to turn away from the particulars. And it seems like the biblical narrative was presenting it in a way that's like, you can't get away from the fact that like the ground of being is personal, which is an extraordinary claim, right? I mean, that's sort of part of the mystery of the incarnation, is to claim that God becomes particularized. Like, whoa. I mean, what do you say about that? Almost. I guess you just worship it. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's I mean, we have to deal with, even in our preaching in the church, it's like we have to deal with the fact that Jesus came to us in a backwater province of the Roman Empire into a culture not very similar to our own, and yet, like that extremely particular, 33-year time span has spread out over the whole earth is something that anybody can participate in now. And so it's like if you try and that's kind of the materialist trap, is to try and say, I can just look at all this from nowhere and I can like actually be in charge of that. Like, well, no, maybe God can do that. But if you want everything, you just have to humble yourself, because the meek will inherit the earth, right? You got to accept just what you have, just this very particular universe that you're living in, your own little corner of the vineyard, and through that you actually get everything. Not by trying to
Yes.
be super
Yes.
big
Yes.
brain.
Yeah.
You get it. You get the universal through the particular, not by extracting away from the particular.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's been the thing that I've been really trying to get my head around, is like that is and I was talking with my sister about this, and that sort of, if you do want to diagram one of the differences between sort of Aristotelian epistemology and Platonic, it seems there's this idea. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the Platonic idea is that you get to the universal, you get to the universals by abstracting out of the particular, whereas the Aristotelian is that you come to the universals through the particulars. Is that
Right, because you encounter. So, we've got this really interesting remembrance theory of knowledge in Plato, right? Is that you remember these things, and that's how you can recognize them. You can recognize the copy of the true form, right? And Aristotle's like, I think I can do that a little bit better. The form of the thing is in the particular thing, right? That is
yes,
the
yeah,
only way that you can actually encounter the form of a thing, is in that particular thing. But because
yes,
that structural functional organization is present in whatever object you're trying to figure out, once you get that pattern, the
yeah.
structural functional organizational pattern out of the object, at that point it becomes universal because you can recognize it every time there's a different instance, even if it's made out of different matter.
Right. Do,
And
do you
so,
do you think that there's a connection between that and the Thomistic idea that every angel is an individual species? this sort of like intrinsic particularity to reality. That like even when you abstract, even when you're in this, the non-corporeal spiritual realm, that you don't sort of enter to this place of everything's like copies or non-particular or universal. It's like, no, actually particularity increases as you move out of the physical into the spiritual. Would you buy that?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
That's
for
interesting.
Thomas Aquinas, the principle of individuation for material beings and the principle of individuation for non-material beings are different. So
Right.
you and
Yeah.
I have the exact same kind of soul. Like we are
Yes.
the
Yeah.
exact
Yeah.
same pattern. And it's not even like a men and women thing. There's just the human soul, human faculties, all of that. What makes
Hmm.
us particular and what makes us different is the bodies that we are embodied in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, if you don't have a body, that can't particularize you. So
You can
it's like
space time. Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a
Sorry.
metaphysical necessity for angels to have a different pattern.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be different.
Yeah. Yeah. Back from, I remember in, I think it's probably in Mere Christianity by Lewis. He makes that distinction in terms of this when he's trying to talk about the Trinity. There's this sort of like, well, you start thinking about why couldn't God have more than one son? He's like, but you realize that as soon as you start talking about every possible way of differentiating those, that which proceeds from God, he's like, you just end up in this sort of spatio-temporal thing. One comes before the other, or one is, and it's like, and then you end up in all these qualities that are all just, yeah, again, they're materially embedded, and then you're like, okay, well, that starts to make sense in terms of why we're not, well, why it's the Trinity in that case. So I'm sure he's pulling from somewhere else.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of particularities.
One particular thing that you've got to attend to right now.
Hey, oh goodness, yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, do you when you think about like particularity as it relates to Christian doctrine, is there anything else that I've just been kind of like trying to work through? And I mean, other things that I think about, sort of the Catholic emphasis on family, right? This sort of you this recognition of the particularity of your existence as you enter into it, and like, well, I guess there seems like there's a really strong connection between particularity and givenness. That seems like a very strong connection right there.
Particularity and given. Talk more about givenness.
Yeah, givenness being like those things that you don't choose, right? The things that oh goodness, I've also called it her thrownness, like the quality that you're just that quality of life in which you're just here, like you were born to.
Creation.
Yeah, creation, right? Creation has this quality of, well, you didn't choose who you, in a lot of like, you had the DNA that you've got the parents. I mean, you start talking about the DNA and you start to, you get all this like, biotech stuff, but like you were born to certain people and there's just there's actually no changing that. And like you were born in a place. I mean, to go back to the example of Christ, like a place, a time, a person, a set of circumstances in which you didn't do anything to choose, and they're not abstract. They're just what you're given. And so then
Mhm.
everything builds on that. I think about our children, and especially when they're this young, I think, well, there's this sort of like, well, they're not going to remember anything that happens to them now. But it's like, well, okay, at what point do they first start to have conscious memory? It's like, anywhere from like 2 to 4. Like, well,
Mhm.
what's framing those memories? Well, it's the things that they don't remember, but they did remember then.
Mm.
And you can sort of just like, there's this recursive loop of all the way back. It's like, at no point have you lived in a world, and this is sort of, again, that like, where are you standing from? You've never been in an experience in which most of it wasn't given to you in the sense of it coming to you from the outside. It's that sort of, you're a thou first before you're an I. Um,
Right.
and so that sort of like particularity and givenness and limitedness, I guess those are all, well, okay, no, here's interesting. I mean, you brought up creation, and I said, yeah, particularity is an aspect of creation, but to go back to that first point, like it seems like the biblical corpus is clear that, and Christian theology is clear that God is particular. The infinite is particular. Is that sayable? I don't know.
Yeah, I would.
What am I driving at?
Yeah, it's like the infinite. the infinite God above all things outside of time has chosen to create particular things,
Mhm.
right? Like he has
Mhm.
chosen to create you and your wife and your children and the state that you live in and all these different things. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so uh, I think it's that the infinite is actually found in and through the particular,
Yeah.
right? And not like
Yeah. Yeah.
abstracting away from it, not like
Yeah.
escaping from it, but it's like, no, you just engage because you're engaging with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and and existence is self, is something that we participate in God with, right? Because he
Mhm.
is, the subsistent act of being itself, right? He is just boom, he is all of the existence. Um, and so when we are actually engaging with reality and we are actually engaging with these very particular finite things around us, we're actually engaging with God
Yeah.
somehow. We're engaging with his providence in creation.
Yeah. That's it. Okay, maybe that's the thing that been trying to pick apart in sort of that in that Vervaeke Peterson talk is that there seems to be this like ver, well, okay, okay, let's take Pageau's language. Vervaeke seems to be this like you ascend up and then you've reached this sort of like level of abstraction and reached total being. Um,
But you can't live on top of the mountain.
but
That
you
ain't
can't
no
live on top
place
of the
for a
mountain.
human being to live.
Yes, exactly. Then and so the degree to which that, well, and then, okay, this is, yeah. So then what does our Lord say, right? He's like, in terms of loving God, right? He says, you do that when you've done that to the least of these being
Mhm.
like individual human beings in front of you. And yeah, when you're saying that, I was thinking about, the Divine Comedy, because you have that. What's so interesting, one of the interesting things about the Divine Comedy, not what's so interesting, one of the great things about the Divine Comedy is that it's this movement out of this sort of abstract allegory of the Middle Ages into this deeply particularized thing, right? So you don't have lust, you don't have loyalty, you don't have avarice, whatever. You have people, you have souls that Dante talks to in his journey, and then in particularly in the figure of Beatrice, like more than anything else. And that's why I think people have argued so much about what she is. And you're like, well, she is God's love in Dante's life. She is also a girl in Florence that married someone else and died young. Like, she's Beatrice, and she's also God's love in his life. And it's not that you need to like try to resolve those things, that like that union as a poetic image is almost like an epistemological statement about reality.
And if you had eyes to see, you would
Yes,
be able to see a lot of people, maybe even everybody, as God's love in your life.
yes, yes. So yeah, Charles Williams makes that point basically in his book, The Figure of Beatrice, which is a very interesting book, and he contends in a very T.S. Eliot kind of way that the reason that we don't is because we grow tired of glory. It's not that we can't. It's not that it's not there to be seen, but that like as we are, we just like wear out from being like from seeing that much glory in other beings, which is like a kind of cynical thing, I guess. I don't know,
Mhm.
or hopeful. It's both, maybe. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, it
yeah,
depends on what your reaction to that is. Because if you're like, "Oh, I get tired of glory. I'm a bad person and being is corrupt," it's like, well, that's one response. Or, "Oh, I
yeah,
get tired of glory. It'll be nice to be in the next world when I'll have the strength to actually handle it
yes,
because of my
yes,
resurrected flesh."
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's like that, that great image that I keep coming back to, which I think we talked about this, right? Where Dante says, "Why aren't you smiling?" And Beatrice says, "Because I'd destroy you. Like my smile would destroy you." It's like, oh, it's not, yeah, we're the problem. I mean, basically that's what it says. Like, we're the problem, which is great. Who says this? There's someone that I read recently, some interesting quote about like when someone, oh, I think it was Chesterton, maybe not though. Anyway, basically like, would you rather find out that like all the problems in your life were caused by someone else or by you? Like, oh, I'd rather be my fault, because then like there's some hope.
I think that was T.S. Eliot.
Is that
But he
also
was
Eliot?
talking to a woman at a party.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. I guess that's Eliot. That does. I mean, it does sound like something Eliot would say. Oh my goodness. Father, are you familiar with the podcast Sacred and Profane Love?
No, I am not.
Oh, it's actually the lady who runs it is in South Carolina. You should go talk to her. She's a professor. It's basically like she talks with like authors and intellectuals and stuff but it's about some favorite work of literature of theirs. So it's really fun, and covered the whole gambit of literature. And any rate, I just listened to the one on T.S. Eliot, and I learned a tremendous amount about that. It was very interesting. He made a very compelling point about maybe a bit more of there being a continuous arc of Eliot's life, rather than this sort of like manic depressive phase of the wasteland that so many people see, and then suddenly this like, now he's just this really happy Christian guy who writes the 4 quartets, and saying like, no, that's really not how you should see this. Particularly, and what I think makes the 4 quartets so valuable is like that darkness is still there, and that he's expressing hope, right? Because it's not, I mean, why would you express hope if everything's great? Like you still have his wonderful descriptions of the Eucharist and Pentecost as these sort of terrible, violent events that are also our salvation. Like, poetically, those are so valuable because of how rough they are. I like Eliot.
Yeah, honestly, the only one I'm actually familiar with at all is The Wasteland. So,
oh, well, you have a treat ahead of you if you ever pick up the 4 quartets.
mm-hmm.
It's
I'm a good American. I don't read poetry.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you just watch your Marvel movies and eat popcorn and don't ask questions. Just watch poetry. Poetry is only for professionals now, and that is not the way this country was founded.
Yeah. Gone are is the idea of the what is it? The intellectual agrarian, the learned yeoman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a high school teacher that made us do poetry out loud, and I memorized a poem by John Donne, and I won for our classroom. And then I was sick the day they did the main competition, and I didn't have a chance to throw myself in at the whole school. So,
do you remember which Donne poem it was off the top of your head?
Death be not proud, for some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. There's more there, but I'd have to polish the rust off.
But it gets in you. I mean, that's the thing about memorizing stuff. Is like, how long has that been? It's been a little while, and
well over a decade. Yes.
Yeah, and it's still in you. I was actually just talking about the value of memorizing with someone, and I was like, they're asking me why I don't do it more, and I said, I don't know, because it pays very high dividends in terms of what it does. And I remember reading at some point a while back, Paradise Lost I also like fairly well as English poetry. Some like retired fireman decided he was going to memorize Paradise Lost. Not some crazy, memory wizard or competitor or anything like that. Just like a retiring fireman, and he had, I think, at the time of this article, he could recite something like 75% of it just verbatim. But he said that it was like having a cathedral in his head that he could just go and walk through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why the church has the Liturgy of the Hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because after 10 years praying the Psalms every day, they're just inside of you, right? So and I was especially bad at this in seminary, but I still do it. I'll just like respond to something with a quote from the Psalms,
I don't know if that would be bad if you know. I don't know that's a bad thing to do. But
Yeah.
no, I had so there's a really traditional Benedictine monastery about 3 hours from here in eastern Oklahoma, Our Lady of Clear Creek. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I have, I think.
Okay, yeah, I spent some. I was out there a couple of times last year, and I'd like spent the night for the first time there, and so I was going to the hours, and it finally struck me. I'm like, these guys are actually chanting in Latin like 5 hours a day, every single day of their life, and some of these guys are 50s, 60s, 70s. What does that do to you? What is that? This got that does something to you after all
Yeah.
that time. I mean, and you sit there, in this not old. It's a sort of a Romanesque, very like subdued brick Romanesque church that they're building with a wonderful acoustics, and you just like you can feel the chant all the way through your body, and that's not even when and the difference between listening to music, choral, like group singing, and actually being part of it, like those profoundly different things, and
Mhm.
thinking like, what is that like when that is the mainstay of your existence? Is to be I don't know. Yeah, we, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, yeah. So even with the new breviary, with the 4-week cycle, a lot of those psalms still get into you.
Oh, I believe that. I believe that. I
Yeah.
mean,
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept, remembering Zion. On the poplars that grew there, we hung up our harps. Sing for us, they said, one of Zion's songs. Oh, how could I sing the song of the Lord on alien soil? If I should forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cleave to my mouth if I remember not Jerusalem of all my joys. And then the last line, which is cut from the breviary, and so I don't have it memorized, but oh, the happiness of the man who throws their little ones against the rocks.
yeah, I've heard the Eastern interpretation of that is that it's about dealing with your sinful thoughts as the moment they enter in your head.
Yeah, yeah. No, just about every Christian has come up with a spiritual allegory of what that line is supposed to mean, and
It's still
I say
there.
that's how it is. That's how it is. That's what that line means. Means nothing more whatsoever than that. Hmm. Oh. And now we've got friend of the show, Andrew K. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Alrighty. We're just talking about the Psalms and memory and having a cathedral in your head.
There's a cathedral in my head.
If you memorize all of Paradise Lost, then yes, you have a cathedral in your head.
Yep.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think so.
It
How have
only-
you been?
I've been well. How are you?
I'm doing well. You may notice I'm not in my normal space. I've invaded Mark Lefebvre's house and
Really?
taken over his computer.
Oh, good. Where'd you put him?
Where did I what?
Where are you keeping Mark now?
He's
I
in the
assume if
living
you've
room.
taken over his house, you tied him up and put him somewhere. Is that what happened?
Yes, yes, because a strong man, if a strong man guards his possessions, they are safe. But if one stronger than he comes up and ties him up, then he can plunder all his possessions.
Oh, that's what happens.
That's what happens. That's what happens. Yeah, yeah. So
Well,
having a
good
good
to
time in
hear.
South Carolina.
How are you? How is oh, Ted is muted?
Ted's muted. He's got a fussy baby. He's trying to calm down, because
Okay.
he's all mature and adult like that. Uh,
Right.
So,
Cool.
but yeah, we were just talking about memorization and the benefits of that. When you have the certain things memorized, they become a part of you, rather than just saying, "Oh, I could look it up on Google later." So, anyway, do they
Yeah.
make you memorize a lot of stuff in architecture?
Yes, actually, I was just looking at a whole bunch of stuff we have to memorize for sure. Actually, it's not quite as much memorization for the most part. It's more critical thinking than that. The most we have to memorize might be like jargon, words that we have to know to communicate things, and I suppose you could memorize a bit about how to like pour footings or set foundations and stuff, but you could just look that up again later anyways, I guess. I
What
don't
you
know.
should do is you should pick your top 5 buildings and memorize as much of their architecture as you can manage, and,
Oh
like,
yeah?
be able to do your own virtual tour through it. Like, if you could do your own, imaginary tour through St. Peter's Basilica, and then you would have St. Peter's Basilica, like, you memorize all the different altars, and
Oh, that might be
I
a
don't
good
know if
idea.
that's actually feasible, but anyway, that's your mission now.
All
You
right.
have to do that so
I'll go
you can.
memorize St. Peter's Basilica.
And then when I'm building a church 20 years from now, you'll be my architect, and you can move the ball forward on Western church architecture.
Yeah, good idea.
It'll be awesome. I'll get the money, don't worry.
Okay, good.
Mark will be a millionaire by then, a multimillionaire by then. He'll
Oh,
just donate.
fantastic. And Catholic.
Well, I've been working on him on that, and he isn't budging.
Oh, okay. Well, 20 years, that's a long time. So,
Yeah.
And sometimes it comes on a person all of a sudden, like it did with us. You sometimes you just don't see the Catholic Church coming until it gets you.
Yeah, yeah, the hound of heaven pursuing you.
Yeah.
Well,
So Andrew,
on the way.
you're an architecture student, is that right?
yes.
Yeah. So you know what fascinates me about architecture is that one of the things is that there are I look at certain buildings and I love them, and if you told me to describe to you how they're different from other buildings, I couldn't do it. There's this
Okay.
I so I'll give you a really good example. So looking at pictures of old English brick farmhouses. So I look at one of those
Hmm.
and I recognize it's made out of brick, generally got pretty small windows, et cetera, et cetera. And then I look at a ranch style house built in the 60s or 70s around here, which also has pretty small windows, also built out of brick. And I'm like, no, I don't like it at all. And then is this whole thing of knowing there's this all these levels of knowledge embedded in it that I simply can't see. And
Yeah.
architecture is one of these things that I have really strong responses to emotionally, and I
Hmm.
also have almost total incapacity to recognize why I have them. So it's just really interesting to me to look at that and be like, and I can get to the point where I'm like, okay, maybe it has something to do with the fact that the casement on the windows is different, or I feel like I should pay attention to the eaves. But beyond that,
It's
I'm
the
like,
context. It's the context
you
of
think
the
so?
English farmhouse, right?
You think so? Okay. Well,
Yeah,
some
because it's
some
like
bricks just look good to me. Yeah.
they so like you didn't have fancy dancy architecture firms, right? You had a bunch of farmers who would get together and they would help each other build their houses, right? They had traditional, they had stonemasons too, I'm sure, to do some of the more difficult and technical work that had to be done right. But they had these traditional ways of building houses. And it's like, we're in England. What do we need? We need to keep the wet out, right? Like that is priority number one. It needs to be high and dry inside. They're just operating under all of these constraints, right? What materials do we have available? What are the skills? What are the tradition that we're operating in? And then what is the climate, and all of that goes into building a sturdy farmhouse that's going to last generations, so you can pass it on, right? Because we're not just going to tear this down in 50 years and rebuild something else. Versus the suburbs where you're just embodying this spirit of efficiency, or at least imagined efficiency.
Hmm.
Is that? I mean, I've always understood that as sort of the idea of the vernacular. There's this sort of these sort of constraints that are just you're operating within, and then, well, it makes me think of several things. One, a friend of mine who's in art school talking about his very favorite assignment in all of art school, and it was they were given a sheet of paper and a ballpoint pen, and they had to use up the entire ballpoint pen on the sheet of paper. And so, because they had this really strong constraint, he ended up doing all these things he never would have thought of doing just to run out of ink. And and that fired a lot of thoughts in his mind. It's sort of the same idea of why do you write a sonnet? When instead of free verse or all of these things, it's and you can see all this ties together again. It's where's the greatest vein of creativity? Is not in being as unconstrained as possible. It's actually being there's this sort of this golden sweet zone of like having a lot of constraint that you have to operate within, and then stepping outside of that. But and like, speaking of Southern England, and like here you are, you've got your stuff. You go around between these villages, you can actually tell what the geology of the place is because all the stone buildings look different because you weren't going to haul rock from 60 miles away, man, when you had horses. Like, what can you dig out of the pit down the road? Like, that's what you build a house out of. And so it's like you can see all these like subtle changes in the geology there because, hey, it's right there on the wall of the house.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I mean, that's why God created finite beings, right? Because and he created us so finite with all of our particularity, because it's the particularity that actually shows variety. I don't know if variety is the right word, but it's like there was a whole lot that God wanted to say, and he didn't necessarily, we can't handle it all at once, so he's got to break it up into little pieces so that we can experience it bit by bit. And the like when you take constraints off of people, they just get lazy and sloppy, as far as I can tell.
What do you think, Andrew? I mean, does that mesh with like the creative work that you've done in architecture school at all? Like, does that bear out in your experience?
Uh, that's a good question. We have done projects with constraints, and we have also done projects with seemingly much less constraint. Um, well, for instance, one of the projects we had in our first semester, when we build models and design, uh, I wouldn't say structures, but spaces maybe, because it's meant to be abstract. We're not working with structure yet. For the first few projects. So the second project we did, all it was we have two words that are opposite to each other, and then we have to figure out how to abstractly represent both those words in space and figure out how to make a transition space between them, which is pretty open-ended. One of my professors said this is probably the only project we will do that's most like just making a sculpture or something like that, not really making an actual building or construction. And it was. People just kind of made all sorts of wild things. But that was pretty much the only constraint. Oh, there was one other one, and that was that the pieces that we were assigned to use with certain dimensions, there's like sticks that are 3 inches by a quarter inch or something, and cubes which are 1 inch in every dimension. And we had a certain number of each of them we had to use. And those pieces had to all be touching each other. And then we could use some foam core board as the quote unquote base. For the first project, everything was sitting on the base. But for this project, the base, we could cut it up and move it however we wanted and have it wrap around the whole project or sit on the ground like usual or anything. But the constraint was all the pieces had to be touching and they have to represent these two words. And then the other project we did, which was much more constrained, was we had a certain site in Central Park bordering Fifth Avenue, and we were given a set of singers to choose from who are famous for being affiliated with New York somehow. And then we would have to represent that singer in the space as a memorial. So now we have something that's a structure. We have to think about how we're going to get people down from the sidewalk to Central Park. So now we have to think about stairs and also, the code for stairs, what's required for a stair. They have to be, I think, like, what is it, 7 inches tall and 11 inches across for certain kinds of stairs. So we have that, and we again have certain pieces to work with, and now we have a whole site, and it's in a real location, uh, Central Park, with real context. So now we have to think about the trees and the sunlight, and what do the tall buildings do to the lighting, and what does that do to the perspective of everything that's going on there? And what about cars that are driving by? And how will people in cars see it compared to people walking? And all this sort of thing. So, and I think it is pretty good to have those constraints to work with, because otherwise you could do really anything. And then what would you do? You know? And it was interesting to see the difference between the previous project, where it was so much more open-ended, just represent these two words abstractly, and then seeing the projects that had an actual location and that sort of thing. Uh, I think it might be more difficult to do the really abstract stuff, but I think thinking about that first is really good before diving into, all the stuff with following code and the site and thinking about all those things and making sure the building's standing and all that. So, yeah.
It's interesting, Andrew, because I've heard at least sort of maybe I could think of at least three different ways of looking at architecture that have been brought up already. So one of them is the sort of abstract, like idea-based thing, and I mean you can recognize a lot of modern architecture. It's like, what is it? I have no idea. It represents some abstract, like the Oculus in New York is a great example. I mean, I think like sort of in like a line drawing way, it's cool. Like it's a cool shape, but it's like what is it? Like I don't,
Hmm.
it feels like this sort of you know void thing. Like part of the reason that it's interesting to us is because it doesn't behave in the way that we expect materials to behave. And I don't know that that like can justify a structure's existence, but like that's a lot of the interest, I think. And then another one is sort of like following code, right? And so the stairs have to be this size. You have to integrate, and you look out at like I look at like industrial buildings, and I'm like, yeah, that's code basically right there. It's like, what? How do we enclose the largest amount of volume with the least amount of material and still maintain like safety standards?
Right.
And then the third one is something that you've sort of mentioned, and that Father Eric was also mentioning, which is which is not to beg the question, but like the teleological view of architecture, right? So it's like, what is this space for? And uh, yeah, it because the thing that I would, you were contrasting it being helpful to look at sort of these abstract ways before you start to look at, say, how does this all integrate with code and the size of the stairs and everything. But what I wonder is like, what do you think about in comparison to looking at like use first, if you will, like the I mean is that something that's like talked about, like when they say like what kinds of like purposes are you presented with as driving your architectural design when you're in school?
Are you talking about like form following function and that sort of thing?
Yeah, in a very broad, in let's say in the like the broadest context possible, because there's the form follows function, like we need a vehicle to pass this tunnel, and so this size, and so we have to have the tunnel be this size, and then there's this form follows function of like, well, what's the function? Is it to keep people dry, or is it to let people have homes, right? Because those are different things, and the moment you say, well,
Hmm.
I want people to feel at home, then you've opened the entire world of human experience and people's expectations and culture. And like I could see in these, just even in these three windows here, that you know there's different expectations about what a home would look like. And I find that fascinating. I think, yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time in Latin America, and like
Hmm.
I never really, there's so many places where I didn't feel at home, not because they weren't homes, but it's just like that's not my expectation for home, right?
Yeah.
There's an entire material language there that does not feel familiar to me, and so I would say, yeah, form following function, but like let's take the broadest sense of function there, and I don't know. I think you end up. I think so. At least the beauty that appeals to me, so much of it comes out of that really like
Hmm.
slow organic process of form coming out of function.
Mm. Well, I could say I could talk about what I heard on one of my first days of our class on architectural theory. My professor was talking about why he went into architecture, and the project we're doing now is bridges. Uh, and he was talking about how he was talking about concepts. So coming up with the concept of the feeling and the idea you want to convey with the design that you have. And he was saying, so with these bridges, what you might think is, okay, well, I have to design something where you get from point A to point B, and the thing has to stand up, and we have to
Mm.
do it as cheaply as possible and make it work. And he said, but that's not architecture, that's engineering. Engineering is just
Huh.
making it work.
Hmm.
Architecture is different from that. And he said, I would have never done architecture if what it was is, putting sticks together to put up a building or just figuring out how to get people from point A to point B on a bridge. Uh, and when we do our projects, the concepts we come up with is never, oh, well, I'm gonna, get people from this town to this town over this lake, and that's what it's gonna be. It's always something different and more abstract. Like I want to represent the cultural differences between these two towns. I want to represent how maybe this town is well, the one we have right now. One of the towns is like a historical site, and the other one is like this modern park or something like that that's gone through all sorts of changes over the years and has had radical successes and problems over the years. And now we have to bridge those two. And how are we going to connect those two and represent those differences? And so we're thinking as architects more about what can we say about these two towns or about the lake or about the bridge and take all this context into account, and how are we going to design this bridge to in some way represent that, maybe not in a super literal way where it's really obvious, but maybe in a subtle abstract way where you just
Mhm.
kind of it makes sense as you're walking through it. You can just feel that this belongs here between these two towns. So
Mm.
that's more what we go for, I think, at least in this project. And I guess the last
Mm.
project we had was much easier. No, no, wait, that's not true. Because the last project we did, the concept wouldn't be, I'm going to represent singer X. It was more like, I want to tell this part of this person's story, and I want to, maybe for one of the people was Lena Horne. Maybe I want to represent her struggle with being someone who looks either black or white or could pass for both. Or maybe I want to represent her, the part of her life where she's struggling to uh, feel free and find maybe a good relationship in her life or something. So there's all sorts of different things to that people can show that people could have the same exact person and create something totally different
Mm.
because of what they choose to express or convey through their project. And
That'd be because
what's
that'd
that?
be because there's. I was gonna say that'd be because they're seeing different parts of the same landscape, right, Father Eric?
Inscape, yeah, I remember
Yeah.
you. That's a word.
I that's actually a funny word because there is a program called Enscape that's a rendering engine for like SketchUp and Rhino and architectural stuff.
Like the letter N dash scape or
I think it's
INSCAPE.
Enscape, if I
Oh,
don't
Inkscape.
remember.
Okay. Yeah, this is something else. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it
that's
is, but
pretty
it's
funny.
just funny because I keep hearing Enscape, and oh yeah, that's
I know,
rendering, of
I
course.
know that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Carlos, how you doing, man?
Hey folks, it's been a while.
Hello.
Yeah.
It's all good, all good. Yeah, it's a it's a bit of a quiet Monday morning today, so I said, hey, I should come on here and at least say hi.
Nice.
Alrighty. How are the kids doing?
Oh, growing fast and
Mhm.
you know, becoming a little hard to handle, but you know, it's not rocket science exactly, but not too bad.
Yeah, every single one of your ancestors managed to figure it out. So,
Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
I've
yeah.
also heard that referred to as like the mother of all selection biases, but
Well, so far none of the kids are dead yet, so um,
success.
yeah.
Two thumbs up.
Amazing.
Oh man. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Carlos, you do a different kind of architecture, right?
Yeah,
Computer
the
architecture?
computer kind. Yeah,
Yeah.
Is it ever beautiful?
it can be. Depends on what you mean by beautiful. If you're the sort of person who finds mathematical proofs beautiful, then I guess it's all like very abstract. Uh, yeah, I guess it can be that you could put it that way. I could say that a lot of computer architectures can also be very ugly. So, and if you ever wondered why, every time some software of yours just crashes randomly or fails to work after an update, and yeah, yeah, most of everything out there, if you think modern architecture is ugly, most of modern computer architecture also happens to be like it's just grotesque, abysmal. So, uh,
Amazing.
I can tell you that much. It's yeah. I guess they can be beautiful, but it's going to be very hard to find such things. Mostly because things keep changing all the time. It's ridiculous because
Mm.
nobody bothers to fix things. It's just hey, that this thing doesn't work the way we want to anymore, so we'll just abandon it and come up with a new one and slash or come up with a kludge on top of whatever was there in order instead of actually trying to fix what's underneath, right? So yeah, that's the problem with modern computer architecture, I would say.
Laura's happy to see you, Carlos. It's all
Hey
caps
Laura.
and exclamation mark. And
I'm still alive.
Mark has been
Yeah,
telling me all about ugly computer architecture all week.
Oh, really?
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not going to find disagreement here. So,
Okay.
so yeah, yeah. I try my best to make it better, but yeah.
Oh, good, good. Fail forward, fix bugs by writing new things, not fixing broken things, no learning why, just do or die.
Yeah, yeah, I
Carlos is
hear you.
computer based.
Thank you. Well, I gotta be. It's my job, So, and we're we're Catholic. We gotta be make things beautiful a little bit at a time. So that's the only way to do it, really.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah,
Very good. Very good. Glad you're trying to make that work. Are you expected to have a release every 2 weeks? Code release every 2 weeks?
it really depends. So, I've worked on projects where we just kept working on things and haven't released anything at all for basically 2 years until the project just died, which is actually unfortunate. It's a lot more common than people realize. Like you spend literally millions on something, hire several dozen folks, and then nothing comes out of it. And then there are
Mm.
things that just release all the time. so so never mind 2 weeks. There's some things that release every 2 hours. So there's a um, there's a um, an idea called continuous development, where basically if you make one small change, then it automatically propagates and after all of the tests and everything pass, it goes out into the wild, right? So a lot of things that if you're using something on the internet, chances are it's already changing, and you just didn't notice, or sometimes you will notice because things will look a little bit different, work a little bit different, or maybe not work a little bit different, which that tends to be more the case. It really depends. 2 weeks is there are very popular software development methodologies that like the 2 week cycle, and I would say it's pretty common for things to release every 2 weeks. Yeah.
Interesting. Mark was not happy about that philosophy and says that the code isn't actually tested properly. Uh,
Yeah, I
that's why
agree.
all the
I
computer
mean,
stuff breaks
yeah,
constantly.
yeah. I fully agree with that. My problem with it is that um, the 2 week thing becomes kind of a dogma. Like we have to release every 2 weeks or bust. Whereas the basic idea is sound, which is you iterate things quickly. You try small changes. Like on the surface, it's very conservative technically, technically speaking, right? So you make a small change so that you have a small release, and do that in quick increments so that you improve things in a gradual, controlled manner. Instead of here are 100 changes that I'm going to make, and then I'm going to deploy them all at the end of 6 months. That's just asking for trouble, right? So the basic idea is sound. The problem is that instead of people like, okay, so let's do this thing slowly, build it up to the point where it actually works, and the dare I say it, beautiful, as as we like to put it. What tends to happen is we have to release it every 2 weeks. It's the 2 week thing that becomes the end all and be all of things, and so uh, here's a bunch of, oh, they're not done yet. Okay, so but no, we have to release. You release the not done things, and it it just becomes worse, and now you have a longer list of things to fix for the next 2 week cycle, and then it just spirals downwards.
Yeah. 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 Well, what do you do, right? Try and fix it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The technical debt. Yeah, I really love that analogy. You fix it now, do it properly, or fix it later with compound interest.
And then there's a flood if you aren't keeping things fixed up properly.
Yep.
Everything just goes back into chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would have thought that you could relate coding to the Bible? People's sins grow so great that God has to punish it with a flood. And the flood's the computer crashing and not turning back on. In case that was unclear. Yeah. Alrighty. I suppose I'm supposed to lead the conversation in a new direction now that things have come to a halt, huh?
Yeah. Well, I see Andrew's here. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Yeah. So it's too bad that you remember from it's been almost 3 years. We've been talking about, hey, my job is supposed to send me out to Philadelphia, and that
Yeah.
never got around to happening because
Yeah,
of
darn.
something that's been happening in the past 3 years. So funnily enough, I still have my visa. Never got around to using it. The company paid for it and everything, and yeah, it's still valid actually. So
Well, maybe we'll head on over to Philadelphia anyway.
yeah, I don't know. I gotta find an excuse to go somewhere, and you know, I remember it wasn't really a plan. It was like, hey, I'll be around for a couple of weeks, and maybe we could meet up, right? And I know it was you and Andrew L. I don't know if is he still around. I think he left the Discord already, and
I don't
hopefully
think
not.
he's in
Yeah.
Discord land anymore. He's out like on a little farm in Maine, and maybe he's got
Oh,
like a wife and a kid now. Who knows? I don't know. I really don't know. Not too
So,
worried
so
about him though. He seemed going in a good direction last time I talked to him. So
Yeah.
yeah. It's been a while, but he's a great. He's a good man. I know. So I'm not worried about him. I'm just wondering if you guys had heard from him recently.
no, I have not. Maybe I should see if I can follow up with him. But if they don't answer on Discord, it's like, well,
Yeah.
Yeah,
got no
me.
way to contact
Yeah,
him.
yeah. I'm still on Discord, but I just lurk. So maybe I check it once a day. I haven't really had the time or energy to be. And then there are a lot of new folks on the Discord now, so I don't even know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, most of the folks that are there. So
Yeah. I mean, it's an online space, right? So it's not even a space, properly speaking, and it's low bar to entry and low commitment when you get there.
Yeah.
So they just tend to be very fluid. They have their place and their purpose, but most human beings should try and settle into something a little more solid, I think.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's a good stepping stone, right, to get somewhere, but it's not a good place to hang out forever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a good training ground if you have anxiety, right? You can click off at any time. I'm safe. But once you get used to people again, you can once you can start peopling, it doesn't make any sense to remain, which is good. I mean, it's sad for people who can't leave, but everyone else wins.
Well, and if you could make a few good friends over Discord and keep up with them, you can make friends that you wouldn't be able to in your local community.
Yeah, yeah. Meet up with them in Thunder Bay, right? And the next thing you know, you're vacationing at their house. It's great. It could happen theoretically. Just saying.
Anything is possible, right? Yeah,
That sounds
yeah.
familiar.
Yeah, it's actually happening right now. Spoilers, this is not my office. Uh, yeah, Mark's been awful good. But one of the problems with the internet is that it's already a filter, and whatever space you're in is already a filter. So you're going to end up with a whole bunch of people who are already similar to you, and you won't learn
Yep.
how to deal with people who are dissimilar to you.
Yes, exactly. I've been waiting for someone to figure that out. I keep telling them
yeah.
it's a filter. What is that? It's a filter. You got it,
Yeah,
Eric. Well done.
yeah. And one thing that I've noticed, like for the past few years, the internet has gotten boring. Maybe not the internet by itself, but when I look in my like YouTube, for example, all my suggestions are there's the Catholic stuff, there's the computer stuff, there's the video game stuff, and there's the car stuff. And I click on the video and like, yeah, I know about this next. And then it's just the suggestions are just a dozen more similar videos, right? Look, I've seen this. Show me something different and interesting, and it never gets around to doing that. It's like the algorithm, and I work with search engines, and I know the kind of bias that a recommendation engine can introduce into the algorithm, because what it does is that, hey, most people, you've let's say bought something on Amazon, a desk. Let's say yours is broken and you need to buy a new one, and you buy a new desk every 15 years or so. So you buy one, and then for the next 3 months, Amazon is going to recommend to you all of the desks that you don't need anymore because you've already bought one, right? Like so what it tends to do is to give you suggestions from all of the people who are obsessive about that particular video or item or topic that you have just looked at or bought or whatever, because those are the same people who spend so much time on that platform obsessively looking at those things, right? And so the internet has gotten boring because I'm just looking at all of these four topics. I still grew up, I as a kid I really like pop science books. I read, the pop style kids encyclopedias and stuff. And then if you read those things cover to cover, which I was a nerd, so when I got bored, I started reading some of them. Besides some, aside from that, and a bunch of old Archie comic digests that um, my aunts kept around for whatever reason. You just read random things that are completely new to you that I would have never read about certain topics if they weren't in that book, just because I had no other choice other than to read. But now you go on the internet and you go on YouTube, you go on Wikipedia. It's all related stuff, and just go like super deep into something that I don't know. You can have like super encyclopedic knowledge about whatever, I don't know, Pokemon, I guess, or
Yeah, it goes
whatever
deep.
kids are into now. Yeah,
Everything goes deep, because what people don't realize is that in order to be an algorithm, it has to normalize against a standard. And so
yeah,
when you start normalizing against standards, eventually you just reach equilibrium, which is great if you want equality. But if you want novelty, you have to, and you can get around it. You can introduce novelty into the algorithm, but algorithms are normalizers. That's what they do.
yeah,
They normalize data. That's the purpose of an algorithm. Otherwise, it's not an algorithm. It's something else. And how would you measure that something else? Well, you can't. And so they measure against the normalization standard. And like if you read anything about AI, they'll talk about normalization. Talk about data normalization coming in. That's how you get the problem of desks. Oh, most people repeat buy products, on Amazon. Once they find a product they like, they repeat buy it, right? And then they don't put in the exception case, which is furniture, an obvious exception case,
yeah,
or there's dozens of things that you never repeat buy, or at least not in the next 5 years or 10 years. They don't account for that in the data normalization, so they normalize the data. They've got a normalizing algorithm, and then you get a bunch of desks. Yeah, I had the same problem. I looked at
yeah,
desks once for someone else, and then I got desks, and I'm like, I'm not in the business of desks. I don't need any.
yeah, yeah. I was about to say, because I know that most of the people who buy desks will repeat buy them for mainly for two reasons. Either they have to buy them for someone else, right? That's what happens to me. I buy something and my mom says, "Hey, I want one of those, a vacuum cleaner or something." Okay, I'll buy you. I'll buy you one. It's great. Or they are in the business of reviewing them, reselling them, whatever.
Or you're buying
Or
batteries, and if you buy
yeah, yeah,
batteries, you're gonna buy them every month.
yeah. You're gonna buy them every month, yeah. Or they're consumables, right?
Yeah,
So
most of the stuff you buy again, right? And buy it
yeah,
again is a big deal, but just doesn't apply to certain items. But they don't exclude them from the algorithm like they should,
yeah.
so they get weird results.
And when it comes to internet content in particular, who are the people who like do but watch videos or read articles repeatedly? A bunch of nerds, right? who are like
Yep.
very obsessed about that particular topic, and so it's just like if okay, look, for example, Catholic YouTube. It's all just a bunch of nerds, really. And I'm, I'm I'm
Catholicism
one of
nerds.
them, yeah. Yeah, I'm one of them. I enjoy that stuff, but at some point, you gotta just get off the internet and actually do the prayer and sacraments and stuff. So,
Too much thinky talky, not enough doey.
yeah,
Yeah. Is there any way to like introduce noise into an algorithm
Oh yeah,
just to see?
tons.
yeah,
Yeah,
Is
the
that
question
something
is,
you actually do?
if you do, oh yeah, a lot of the algorithms have it. It's just that again, you have to, if you normalize the data incorrectly, and most of them do, because it's actually tricky. then you come up with weird results. But also, how do you add noise into a general unbounded set of YouTube videos? Because I don't want children's videos ever, because I'm not a child. Right. And so like you have to rule those out. And then it's like, all right, well, what is if all I watch are, and I don't do this, but let's say it's lathes and we'll say Jordan Peterson, right? And maybe Justin Brierley or something, right? How do you add noise into that set with all the other things you could? Because there's YouTube videos on cars. Do you introduce those? He likes lathes, but it's mostly talk stuff. And what if I have a history channel or a survival channel? Like, what does noise look like in the content? Because you can't circumambulate those things. So what it tends to do is focus on, well, what do other people doing that like? And to Carlos's excellent point, if they're nerds, they like detail, and so you'll go deep instead of wide. And then noise deep looks different from noise wide. This is all, they don't understand the difference. And when you don't understand the difference, you've got one problem. But when you do, and then you realize, oh, there's no such thing as noise at the level of topics. Because, what would it be? Like nothing on the internet knows that I like H.P. Lovecraft. Nothing. That data is not there. You could infer it maybe, and there's a bunch of stuff that I like that the algorithms know nothing about for various reasons. Some of them are I've hidden the information, right? And some of them are it's just stuff I've never looked up on the internet because I have, originals. Like a lot of the computer stuff, I have the original books. I don't need Google. I don't need to look that stuff. I have the book. I go to the bookshelf. I grab Stevens. I've got all the TCP/IP network code I could ever want, right? If I want C library stuff, I've got the Plager book. I can just look up all the C library stuff. I don't need to go to Google for any of that. So Google actually doesn't know that I'm a C coder. There's probably no way in hell that Google knows anything about.
Except now you've spoken it into their website, and they're going to take the transcripts and they're going to match it to your voice, which they have hours of recordings of. And then the lizard people from inside the earth are gonna steal your soul. They're
not gonna spend that much money on me, Eric. Everybody thinks like, oh, they're doing this, and I'm like, do you have any idea how much money that would cost? They are not doing that for you. You are not worth that much money to them. Sorry, you're just not.
Yeah. It actually happened one time that it was so uncanny what YouTube ended up suggesting to me. I know it wasn't targeting me in particular, but sometimes it can feel that way. Because I remember at my dad's house, one of the air conditioners there failed, and so we were just talking about it over lunch. I was doing a video chat with them. So what happened with the air conditioner? It had a failed capacitor. I just had an electrician come in and replace it, and it's not working again. And then the next time I open YouTube, it says how to replace an air conditioner's failed capacitor. Okay. So but I do watch electronic repair videos on YouTube, so it's plausible that it just ended up on the top of the queue on that particular morning. But it was so uncanny. Like, you guys read my mind, like, or listening to what I'm talking about. So it was really crazy.
Well, if you've got that Google Assistant, the voice-activated Google Assistant turned on, it has to listen to you all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if it's not listening, it's not going to hear you say, "Okay, Google."
Right. Yeah, they do.
Yeah,
they do collect that data too. Alexa does as well. But also, look, the zeitgeist hits everybody at the same time. That's what it is. And then once it hits your friends and they do a search for something on Google, then Google's going to hit you next. So it's the zeitgeist driving Google, not the other way around. And nobody knows what the zeitgeist is or how to control it. So they freak out, right? That's where you get egregores and all this other stuff from.
Yeah, the thing is, the algorithm is part of the zeitgeist by now. So,
well, it amplifies it. Technology is just an amplifier for other things, right? It's a compressor of time and space, and it's an amplifier for a bunch of things, and that's all it is. And then when we mistake that for consciousness, because we have a conversation with the chat GPT thing or whatever, and then it's really just reflecting us back, and we
Right,
don't
right.
realize that, right? That's why I like when John Vervaeke talks about it. He says, "Yeah, get two of those things to talk to each other and watch what happens. They spin out pretty quickly. Of course they do, because they're trying to mirror each other, and there's nothing there, so they spin out, and then they don't say anything, and that's how you know they're not conscious. It's funny. It's not that hard. Nobody runs that test though, because they all want to sell the dream of AI consciousness that's going to lead us to the equal world. And yeah, I have a new video on navigating patterns about that, by the way. Just
Yeah,
saying.
they will run that test, but with different goalposts. Like they'll have an AI program play chess against itself or play
Yeah.
Go against itself and say, "Oh, it's so," but yeah, but it's a game. It's bounded.
It's bounded.
Right?
It's bounded
It's
set.
bounded. Yeah, I remember reading an article about ChatGPT when it first came out, and there was this professor complaining about, "Hey, my student submitted to me a bullshit article. Sorry, that that's his word, okay, not mine. Okay, about Immanuel Kant or something. So it was a philosophy professor, and what I found disappointing about that article was that he was complaining about the plagiarism more than the bullshit, right? But that if professors took their job seriously enough, it if he thought that, hey, this article, this essay is full of crap, and I will fail it on the basis that it is full of crap, and then it turned out that, hey, this kid actually copied it from a computer program, and and that's interesting. That's an interesting side note. No, the main point was, hey, he copied it off the computer program, and then the BS was kind of a side note. Like, guys, they're saying this is a game changer for higher education only because the professors made it so that everybody got so sloppy, professors, students, that when I was in high school, I copied an article of the internet about consumerism. I don't even remember what it was about, but they asked us to talk about it. And my teacher approached us saying that you guys didn't write this. We sort of had a like backroom deal saying that you redo this article. I know you copied it, and I'm going to give you. I'm going to regrade your essay with some deductions, but don't do this again. And so when I was in high school, it was like, hey, you didn't write this. I know you do this again, right? And that was in high school when I was a kid, when the internet was we had internet here in the Philippines, but it was still dial up, and it was difficult to connect, and not a lot of people can afford it, or especially not a lot of people back then could afford a computer. Right. So I thought, hey, we're being lazy. Let's just copy something off the internet. Nobody will ever know. And I know for a fact that my teacher did not have internet access at the time, but he knew that we didn't write it, and he called us out. Right. And I thought, you know what? If more professors, more teachers just do this, none of this AI crap is going to be relevant, because none of it will will even the kids will never even think of copying something off the internet, because they know that their professors will never allow it. But unfortunately,
yeah, if they
we've
know
gotten
them.
that sloppy. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think your professor knows you, then when you're not being your authentic self, you're going to be like, oh, I know I'm going to get caught because the professor knows me. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. It's a really good point.
And that's always been a thing, right? Like you could copy a paragraph out of somebody else's book. It's easier to do with the internet, but like the plagiarism's always been a temptation in the academy because
Yeah.
we've always had books, and I don't know. It seems like the Chat GPT actually kind of has a voice, and it stinks. It's not interesting at all, but it does have like a voice. So unless you tell it to do something in the style of something, and then it like tries to give this weird computerish like um, the prompt was a story about a guy who put a peanut butter sandwich in a VCR in the style of the King James Bible. And that produced a pretty amusing result because it's got the King James Bible and it can copy that voice, and then it was just this ridiculous prompt about the peanut butter sandwich, But unless you do something like that, it just seems to just be so bland.
Yeah, it's weird how you can even tell, but you can. And you don't know how you can tell, but you can.
Yeah.
And that's the real key. It's like, oh, you can tell there's nothing behind this. There's no spirit, right? It would be interesting to have it do like a homily or something for, in the style of a Catholic priest and see what it
No, no,
comes
no.
up with.
Do it with like, can it do it in the style of Fulton Sheen? Can it do it in the style of Bishop Barron? Right?
Yeah. And see what happens, because I bet the spiritual deadness would come right through.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that that comes through with actual Catholic homilies, and then for that matter, academic lectures and everything like that. And that's how Chat GPT can pass for, oh, this is a game changer because now we cannot detect plagiarism. Yeah, only because we've allowed it.
Yeah.
Only because we ourselves have been so emptied. Like we don't have inner lives. A lot of modern people don't, and I've only noticed um, the fact that I used to lack an inner life when the whole thing was explained to me. What's an interior life? And then many years later of trying to figure out prayer sacraments, and then suddenly it's there. I don't know at what point I didn't have an inner life and at what point I did, but most folks, I think, ignore their inner lives and its own noise, and that's why it seems spiritually dead, to the point that we think that computers can substitute for actual thinking, actual consciousness, and things like that.
But they can't. Stupid
Yeah,
computer
no.
won't tell me what to do. I'm the boss here. Until I need directions, and I'll do exactly what the computer tells me to.
That's an interesting idea that there are priests that are so dead inside that they're giving AI like homilies in their sermons or whatever. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, we really have become more material, more mechanical, more robotic. And so it looks like, oh, AI is really getting there. It's like, no, we're just closer to AI. That's the AI's not coming up. We're going down.
Yeah.
Well,
Humans have
and
become dumber. Yeah.
Catholic preaching, like anything, is on a bell curve. Some of it is really bad, and most of it's okay. And then there's some real rock stars. It's just how it goes. So yeah, when you're in that middle category where it's just sort of like, yeah, that's pretty good. Every once in a while, you'll get something nice, but otherwise, not gonna have any of the fireworks. It's nice though. That's one of the nice things about a vacation is I don't have to come up with any homilies while I'm here. We could just let that land lie fallow for a week. We don't need to till it. We don't need to harvest it. It's just rest.
So on that note, Father Eric, do you, when you do daily mass, do you give the optional homily, or do you just do that for Sunday?
Oh, I do. I give the homily. Yeah, I just during my prayer, I'll look at the scripture, and then I'll go for it. Basically, sometimes honestly, because they're a little more extemporaneous, sometimes they end up being really good because I'm just channeling the spirit. Just a medium. Maybe that's not the right language. Anyway, And then other times they're just kind of lame and generic. But as long as they're not too long, nobody really minds if it's generic. So yeah, I do, and it's kind of an expectation in my area that you do the daily mass homilies. I think if you were to regularly omit them, that would cause a comment.
Right. Yeah. Because I actually think, and then again, it's not a one size fits all thing. That it's given us an option for a good reason. I think. I actually think some priests would do well to just omit the homilies when they do the daily mass, because I think some folks just run out of steam. Well, whatever works, but I guess it also depends on what your parish is expecting. I know Filipino parishes will expect a homily. That's for sure. So I guess that's why most priests would do the daily mass homily, unless you were attending at a convent or a monastery or something where you know it's not the expectation. But in the usual diocesan parish setting, yeah, the priest will give the homily, and the church ladies that are there, and the one odd youngish Opus Dei dad would be half expecting a homily to be there.
Yeah. And I know my pastor, his daily mass homilies are short. He's done in like a minute usually, and he's just got one point, and he's just going to make it, and then we're just going to move on. Uh, but I always have something to say. I've always got you people need to know this. This is important. So it usually takes me a little. I'm usually going 5 minutes or less, but it can be. Sometimes I just really get going, and I can't stop. Everybody tells me what a wonderful job I've done. So if they're not going to give me any feedback or any punishment for preaching, there's no reason to stop. But I know my buddy up in Grand Forks, they've got an early mass that's attended by a lot of people who need to get to work, and they will let you know if you've gone too long, because they don't want to have to leave mass early. And so, but yeah, I haven't been assigned to a parish that has a working man's mass in it yet. So, yeah, ours is at noon. So,
How was it? How was it in the medieval days? What did they do for our masses? Do you know?
I bet you they rarely ever preached on a weekday.
I'd be curious to find out if they. I'd be surprised if they didn't.
I remember hearing somebody, it was Dr. Lev, and she was talking about church architecture and church practice, and that there was a time and a place somewhere in the church history where the preaching wasn't even done at Sunday Mass. It was done on the Saturday night before, and these guys would go like 2 hours, and you were expected to laugh, you were expected to cry, you were expected to have your life transformed by them. And they were like professional preachers who were like circuit riders. And I don't know anything about
Interesting.
but that's just like a different world, And so it was just something you do. It's like, well, Sunday afternoon, or Saturday afternoon, there's no such thing as Netflix yet. We'll just go hear what that preacher who's in from out of town. We'll go see if he's any good, and hopefully they'd send one of their best ones there. But yeah, I'd heard about that, and but you didn't give like any dates or times for when this was done, so it's just hard to track it down, and I've never done any research on it because I don't know why I would. Somebody else research it. Just give me the answer. Okay, Google. Chat GPT, give me an answer. What was the history of preaching in the Catholic Church?
It sounds more like entertainment, like a troop show or something. Yeah, that's bizarre.
Well, some people treat it as such, even to the modern days. presume. It's like, hey, I don't go. I go to that parish because the preacher's funny. Yeah, so for what it's worth, my anecdotal experience is that the one time that there was not a daily homily was during the time when my local church had the TLM, the diocesan one, right? So
Traditional
there was
Latin
a
mass
daily,
is what you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. So there was a daily low mass. I remember it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and yeah, that's the only time that there wasn't a kind of some sort of daily homily, even a short one like 2 3 minutes. Yeah, and every other time, uh, the the priest always gave one. But that's an anecdote of one, so take that as a great with a grain of salt. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is that doing a low mass even that takes at least 40 minutes. And if you're distributing communion, it might be more like 45, 50, compared to if I were to do a Novus Ordo mass, I could get that done in like 20 and it wouldn't be disrespectful at all. So it might be just a matter of the timing on it. If you got people who are trying to get off to work or whatever, but it might also be the ethos of it, right? That they just view preaching differently in the old ways. Anyway,
right, yeah, 20 minutes sounds about correct. Because when I remember when I was in college, I sometimes attended daily mass at the local Opus Dei Center, and they wouldn't preach. Like it was over in 20 minutes, but the usual thing that Opus Dei does is that you sit there for half an hour, um, doing your morning meditation before the mass, and then you spend 10 minutes of meditation after the mass for Thanksgiving. So the mass itself is like 20 minutes, but you're actually there for a full hour.
okay, so
That's the
it's like
difference.
you've got a holy hour with mass
Yes,
two
yeah,
thirds of the way through. That's not bad. That's not bad. The Pope's assassins, they've got that figured out, right?
uh-huh.
Opus Dei, right? That was the Pope's assassins and the Da
Yep.
Vinci Code, I think.
Yeah.
That's us assassinating during the day and bringing flowers to your wife and reading bedtime stories to your kids at night. So
Oh my goodness. It's ridiculous, ridiculous. We had an Opus Dei priest at the seminary. He was Austrian, Monsignor Schlag, and he taught us the church's social teaching, Catholic social teaching, and it was good. He pointed out to me that or to the whole class, that in the Soviet Union, like sometime in the 1970s, they legalized private gardens. You could grow your own food that was illegal, right? Because all of the production was controlled by the state, right? And then within like 5 years, that was half of the Soviet economy.
oh wow, the private gardens, you mean?
The private gardens, yeah. And probably, like part of that economy was people getting seeds, people exchanging equipment, getting fertilizer, all those sorts of things. But yeah, right. It's just like this distributed system, where you've got lots of little systems rather than one big top-down system. Quite a bit more agile, and people liked that certainty of knowing where their groceries were coming from. I'm sure. Rather than rationing, constant rationing.
Interesting. I think what I've seen. I mean, look, I didn't grow up under communism, but all of the documentaries I've seen about communist or ex-communist countries, whether it's sympathetic or not, they always end up pointing out that it ends up something like that, right? So at first the state centralizes everything, and then eventually they have some form of private enterprise, whether it's like gardens or like little markets or such, for the simple fact that if that doesn't happen, people starve. so, so I think I watched this Netflix. I don't know if it was a Netflix documentary about North Korea, where they had this crazy Spaniard who joined the North Korean military, and then he was their host, the host of journalists who went there, and they actually went around central Pyongyang, and they showed markets there that you can like it looked like Hong Kong. I mean, this is modern day North Korea. It looked like Hong Kong or Singapore or some of the markets here in Manila even. And I remember they posed a question to their host saying that why is it all in hard currency? Hard currency. We mean to say South Korean won or US dollars. Uh, and then they were saying, oh, this is a tourist area. And then they were like, we don't seem to see any tourists around here. These are all locals. So, so, so I mean, the journalists were very respectful. They were not like very overtly that, hey, North Korea is bad. This is against their ideology or anything like that. It was a very sympathetic portrayal, But even they were noticing things like this did look like tourists to me. It's spending foreign currency, So
My goodness, when it's obvious enough that the journalists can actually notice it, that's pretty daggone obvious.
yeah, and one other thing, Father Eric, that because you're a Catholic priest, and I the journalist was also a Spaniard, I think. He was Catholic, and he said, "Hey, where can I go to mass?" And apparently they had a Catholic church there, and they didn't have a priest, and then so they had some kind of prayer service without the mass, and I think without communion. And I found that interesting because apparently in North Korea, Catholicism is one of the religions that are still legal. And I found it interesting that they were respectful enough of our faith to not have a mass if there wasn't a priest.
Hmm.
And I'm like, so,
Interesting.
I found that interesting. So besides the marketing, that was the thing that I found interesting because you can have all of these ersatz masses with whatever, people do it all the time, so casually, and but the North Korean authorities are finally respectful enough of the act of actual Catholicism to, I don't know if it was a fake church or anything like that, to be upfront with saying that, hey, we don't have a regular priest here, so it's just you know whatever.
You got me
Fascinating.
curious now.
Yeah, it was a long time ago that I've seen that, so I don't even remember the title.
Yeah, I can see
Yeah,
that. I mean,
let's
a
take
lot
a
of
look
people
at-
respect religion for no reason, and it overrides politics and economics and all kinds of areas, and people don't think about it or talk about it. But yeah, it's quite common. I mean, even in Stalinist Russia, they didn't prevent people from worshiping, right? But they did prevent them from having too many copies of the Torah and stuff. So, too many Bibles. If you're distributing that religion, that's a problem.
So, Changchun Cathedral is the nominal cathedral of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Pyongyang, North Dakota. North Korea. Woo! Boy, there's a Freudian slip. Is one of only 4 official Christian places of worship in Pyongyang. It operates under the Korean Catholic Association.
Well, to be fair, both places are cold, as,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned.
It's not affiliated with the Holy See.
Oh, uh-oh.
Yeah.
That wouldn't
That's
be
The
weird.
surprising.
cathedral has no bishop or even an ordained priest. There's no resident priests either. Any masses that are actually offered there are offered by foreign clergy.
Interesting.
Interesting indeed.
So that means official clergy is coming from some other country.
It might be the case that only like diplomats ever get mass there or something, and if they like bring a priest along, it's like, hey, we've got this building, It's like, well, bread, wine, gold, vestments, book. Okay, we could do this. And then if you're like clergy traveling with an ambassador, you've probably figured out how all these things work from the official channels.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Like, if you've got to go to a Catholic church, bring your own priest. I did that today. It's a good idea.
And I sat around and did nothing the whole time.
Well, you get a job offer out of it. It's good.
I did. Yes, the priest was like, "You wanna join the Charleston diocese?" And I, okay, I gotta think about that.
Pretty warm this time of year. It's kind of great.
Yeah, it's negative 10 in Fargo right now. It's 50 degrees here. How about that? Oh. Alrighty. Well, I'm starting to get tired. Anybody got any parting shots?
No, it's been great to have you here. So
Yeah,
I'm
great.
glad I can carry around a Catholic priest whenever I need one now. It's great.
Alrighty, Carlos, I'm delighted you hopped on.
Yeah, and nice talking to everyone and seeing everyone again.
Yeah.
It's just about time for lunch here, so I gotta gather the kids, and in the afternoon, get back to work. So
Alrighty, you take care.
thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
All right,
Carlos.
bye.
Andrew did say he might have to step away for a bit. So if you're not here, Andrew, I'm just going to end the stream and that won't hurt you. God bless you all. You're all beautiful.
God bless.